Welcome to the October State of the Union. We have not as full caging results as we usually do, but I do have top lines for September. So revenues were down 2% year over year. That's average gift up 4%, donations down 6%. Kind of the usual tale of the tape for donations. That does fit in with the pattern that we saw for the rest of the year. Q1 was very challenging, but then we've gone into a relatively flat period in mail donations. Sorry, question on that? Okay. Then let me move ahead. That was the caging data. Any questions, comments?
How does that compare year over year?
Sure. So these are the year over year by month. Looking at these numbers, if memory serves, we're about down 5%-ish, plus or minus, for the first 3 quarters of the year when you factor in the September data. That means, generally speaking, the average gift has gone up throughout the time, and the delta has been in the number of donations.
And is that just looking back at 1 year, this last year?
This is just this past year.
Gotcha.
Let me pull in. I have in another deck, 1 second. I have some data on going back 2 years. So let me pull that. Sorry about the delay. Okay, I'm going to pull in another slide here quickly. Please pardon my mess while I do that. Okay. Let's see if we can edit this live. Okay, so this is going to be, we won't have August data in here, sorry, September data in here, but August 2024 revenue, flattening out from 2023, which was a more significant decline over 2022. And the tail of the tape from 2023 to 24 is basically the trend that we've seen for a couple of decades now. Fewer donations, larger gifts.
And seems to be flattening out a bit from the post-COVID bumps.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would say that's a good general impression, and I'm going to pull in one more slide here. It's in a different format, but hey, we're flying. Better to have the information. So this is the tail of the tape for the past decade from Giving USA data. So obviously not through this year, but indexing to 2012, the donations that have come in have gone up 34% over that time. And the number of donors has dropped 16% during that time. So that's that gap that we're talking about, where we have greater revenues over that time, peaking in 21, obviously with the pandemic, but that the number of donors have gone down, except for a small bump in 2020.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
No problem. And that actually goes into the Generosity Commission report that just came out. Generosity Commission is a work with Giving USA. Highly recommend the report, as it's a much deeper dive into something that I'm going to go into rather shallowly, but elucidates these trends a little bit more. Using the PPS, the Philanthropy Panel study out of University of Indiana, I believe, we've seen the number of households donating to nonprofit organizations going down consistently over time. And the trend of that is that every religious group, every economic group, every racial group, both sexes, I don't know if there's data on trans giving, so I say I'm going to use sex instead of gender here. But among all of those groups, giving has gone down over this time. But there are also changes in the makeup of who is giving that are dramatic. So, for example, giving among wealthy donors has gone down very slightly over this time, whereas giving among those who make under $50,000 a year has plummeted. And so there have been greater challenges at retaining those smaller donors. One of the things that Greg Fox, our chief strategy officer, talks about is average gift actually increasing, or are we losing out on smaller dollar donations, causing average gift to increase without people giving more? And when you dig into the data, it's a combination of those things. Obviously, during the inflationary periods, people were giving more because they're knowing their dollar needed to go more farther. But there is also a loss of those smaller dollar donors. There was a temporary help from the pandemic. The report talks about how that there was a reversal of trends, more people giving smaller average gifts, increasing that participation in giving. But Giving Tuesday data shows that that surge of donors ended in the first quarter. I know our data showed it a little bit later, may have peaked in Q2 or Q3 for our clients of 2021, but that there was a retreat to the trend over time. So the reports asked, why did this happen? So direct quote, micro and macro dynamics, those within nonprofits themselves, especially related to how the organizations raise funds, and broader trends over which nonprofits have little control. So let's talk first about the broader trends. Economic stratification, as the social stratification increases, you have more higher dollar donors, you have more people who are able to give less. And so that's a macro indicator of some of these trends, and also drives one of the micro trends, in that there's the old Willie Sutton, I rob banks because that's where the money is. There is a greater tendency toward mid-level and major and DAF and planned giving, because that is where the money is. And so a lot of the choices that we've made have moved us toward larger gifts, fewer people. Declining religiosity. It is both religious and non-religious folks are giving less in their own subgroups, but giving to religious organizations has remained stable for the past decade, as all other basically sources of giving have increased. And so as people pull back from religious institutions, there's less giving to those institutions. And so greater, for a lot of folks, that was the one place that they would give. And so when you're going from 1 to 0, that decline in participation happens more dramatically than if everyone were to stop giving to environmental organizations. I'm not advocating this, in fact, quite the opposite. But that would be, there are fewer people for whom that's the only type of organization to whom they give. Tax incentives. We talked last month about the impacts of the 2017 tax bill, and the fact that fewer people itemize and thus fewer people get incentives from giving. We are still, I know we're pushing through TNPA and through other organizations for that greater above the line deductibility for tax donations. And spoiler alert, that's one of the things that the Generosity Commission advocates as well. Declining trust in institutions, and I'm going to combine this with rechanneling of giving. There is just as much generosity out there, but if people don't believe in institutions as much, there is more giving to community, giving to family members, those sorts of things. And so people are still giving, just not at the same rate to 501c3 formal organizations, which is a pity because you can help a cancer patient. A nonprofit can help cure cancer. You can help someone who's been impacted by a drunk driving crash. MAD can help try to stamp out drunk driving. And so for the greater solution to these things, nonprofits are still vital, and we need to be working to make that case to the extent that's possible. One of the things that sticks with me from the beginning of the pandemic is there was a poll that said, how are you giving charitably during this challenging time? And something like 43% of people said, well, I'm shopping locally. And it's like, well, that's good. You know, you're helping out your neighbor, but it's local and it's not giving. And so trying that, one of the studies that I was considering for test of the month, but it just got too dense, was a study about how Facebook likes can be a path to a charitable gift. There are a lot of these things that can be paths, but aren't gifts themselves. Question in the chat, are Gen Xers are now entering or in their 50s now. Is there any data to show their giving behavior or tendencies compared to baby boomers and the greatest generation? Yes, and I'm glad you said that, because the next bullet point is demographic shifts. So all generation and age cohorts are giving. It's not necessarily generational, although it has a generational impact. What do I mean by that? So each generation is giving less than the generation did before them, by and large. And it's not localized. Each age group is giving less than that age group. So people in their 40s now are less likely to give than people who were in their 40s 10 years ago. And why that it's important is that it's not necessarily, oh, these younger generations are bad in any way. It's that every day givers pass away and non-givers are born. And we need to do a better job of converting people somewhere in the middle. And so it's not necessarily that, Rachel, to your question, it's not necessarily that the moment that a Gen Xer, if someone's on one side of that line or in the other side of that line versus a baby boomer, that things are going to change in any sort of dramatic way, but it is a gradual line that goes down. That said, the younger people are, the less likely they are to engage in religious institutions. And there is this social disconnection, which is a bullet point that I skipped somehow, that people aren't necessarily as engaged in their community as they used to be. And so it's incumbent upon us to build that as well, because volunteering, adult volunteering, now these are looking at two different measures and questions. So there was a peak in 2003. It's not that, and it's something that actually happened between 15 and 17 to cause that jump up. But volunteering plummeted during the pandemic, and it hasn't gone back up again. And so that whole idea of bowling alone, that we're engaging in these social activities more within family structures and not within leagues or communities, is something that does usually correlate fairly highly with charitable giving. And then there is a blurring of lines to politics. We've talked frequently about how the election season likely isn't going to impact giving, and I stand by that. The ad spend will definitely skew things. There's $10 billion in DRTV advertising that's happening this year that will not happen next year. But so that can't help but spike ad rates. But in addition to I shopped locally or I gave because I helped out my sister-in-law when she was going through a tough time. There's also I gave to this campaign as my way of making a difference. And so we're facing competition for that DOPA hit that someone gets when they donate from a lot of other areas. Rachel, did I answer the question adequately? I know I ranged all over the map there.
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. Talked about volunteerism dropping. Commission goes through some fairly dry recommendations. Increased research would always be beneficial. That's 1 and 2. It's having people talk more about their volunteer experience, about how they give and volunteer. I have not looked at this Congress, but I remember last Congress or the one before, looked at all of the job titles that people had held in their life. House, Senate, no one had worked in nonprofits or been in, and so having people who make the launch into politics, who understand what our organizations go through, would be really valuable as well. Talking about encouraging giving locally. Number 4 is interesting, and I'll come back to that in a second. Having employers talk about giving. And then there's structural, changing the tax deduction so you can have above the line tax deduction and make it easier to comply with regulations, as well as cracking down on those that are obvious scams that you do see notice about. Number 4 is interesting, and I think it goes to, I mentioned there was macro and there's micro. There's all of these trends that are working to cause this greater revenues, fewer donors challenge. But it's also the choices that we make. When you use RFM segmentation, or when you model on purely when someone made their transactional figures, I look at it and I say, who is more likely to have a 50-year giving history, a 70-year-old or a 49-year-old? They're having more data in our data stew where we're saying, this person doesn't have the same giving history, but they have all of the other markers of someone who would be likely to give. Let's take a chance on them. That sort of modeling is really helpful. Giving Tuesday data shows that 7% of people say, I would give more if I were asked, but I just simply haven't been asked. And then data from give.org, the Better Business Bureau survey, finds that that's twice as likely among those of Hispanic origin, those who are Black, and that it skews higher among those who are younger. Those have to be active pursuits. And in some cases, it's a matter of changing messaging. Will the 30-year-old respond to the same direct mail package as the 80-year-old? Maybe, maybe not. We do see that 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds give to direct mail, but they tend to transact online. They're more likely to transact online than offline from a direct mail package for a number of organizations that we've looked at. And so mail works with this audience, but does the same mail package work? And as long as we're saying, well, A beat B, so I'm rolling out with A, we're going to ignore that 40% of people may have preferred B, and that we can customize toward that. And that's mail, that's digital, that's video. It's how do we create a greater one-to-one experience with donors? And that, I think, is how we can expand on number 4 and say, how do we bring more people into philanthropy? It's by talking to them individually and knowing that they are there and ready to give. So that's my soapbox. Any questions on the report or the report recommendations? Okay. onto the potpourri section. It would not be a State of the Union nowadays if I didn't have, oh, there's something in the chat. Okay, thank you for that. If I didn't talk about AI at some point. So one of the things that Google is doing is serving AI generated images of mushrooms when users are searching for some species, which is a challenge because some mushrooms that look fairly similar, some are poisonous and some are not poisonous. And so when they searched, a user searched for Coprinus comatus, which is a fungus known for this kind of shaggy cap that you see over on the left side. They were served up the image on the right, which looks nothing like it if you're a fun guy, mycologist, I think it is. And so when presenting that they're real, the concern is that Google may be helping poison people with their AI generated images. They are tagged. So if you are looking to eat mushrooms, look just for the images that are not AI tagged. New publishing data is out, and book sales are actually up year over year, which was exciting to see. I grew up in libraries, working at them in high school and then in college, and basically living in them for large periods of time. So very happy to see this. It is in 3 major areas where it's up. It's in adult fiction, it's for higher education materials, and it's for religious presses. And so I started thinking about this, and I'm like, is there a way that I can take adult fiction and mix it with some sorts of religious undertones, and perhaps the hero is someone who comes from a higher education sphere? And then I realized I'd reinvented Dan Brown. So not going to make a mint off of that. You'll still see me here next month. Scientists have, as you know, Moore has its neuro fundraising lab, and I work with them a lot. And so I'm interested in this sort of thing. Scientists have made the most complete map of a brain of a single fruit fly, where they can capture more than 54 million synapses in this just beautiful picture that goes through it. It's a huge deal because you can then look and see not just what region lights up when something happens, but down to the neuronal level. And so this I think looks ahead at, we were able to decode the genome of the fruit fly before we were the human. This raises the tantalizing possibility that we may be able to do this for humans as well, and understand what the heck we're thinking, but also say, this is how this brain's been impacted and how we may be able to treat it better. And then finally, there's a special level of petty that I just really appreciate. And I have to give it to this Australian woman, because you're able in Australia to make noise complaints about if airplanes are going over your property or in some way violating your individual airspace. And so in Australia, one woman was responsible for nearly half of the country's entire reporting of aircraft noise complaints. Something like 42,000 were made that year. And this woman had over 20,000 complaints of this. And so let me quickly do the math on this. I apologize. I meant to do this before the call. And that is 2.5 complaints per hour if you were making them every day, every hour of every day, nonstop. So probably she also slept. So let's round up and say she was making 3 or 4 complaints per hour. I know of no one who's engaged with bureaucracy quite like this. Then our requisite self-promotion. couple of webinars coming up that I'm hoping you can catch. You can find these at wearemore.com/webinars, or just go to the page and navigate there. One is talking about unlocking digital strategies, looking through what these are some of the test results that hopefully have been interesting over the past few months. So going into depth on those, that's why I didn't have a test of the month this month. A lot of good stuff in there. And then we mentioned donor advised fund giving briefly earlier. On Wednesday, the 23rd, we'll talk about donor advised funds and specifically how they can help at year end. Not something that's often thought about in year-end planning, so I'm excited for that as well. Any questions or comments? Well, turns out I didn't run too short because I got up on my giving soapbox. Feel free to shout out any questions that you have. I'm at nellinger@wearemore.com. Happy to answer anything that you have. Let me know if there are topics you would like covered in future pieces. We will send out, as we usually do, the deck and the videos in our monthly newsletters, which we're trying now to do the first week of every month. If that timing doesn't work for you, you need it sooner, you want some of those slides, let me know, and I can get them to you separately. Thanks much and have a good day.